Hi, welcome to my video on Aristotelian Virtue Ethics. This is for the AQA Philosophy Specification 7171 and 7172, although it may well come in useful for philosophy and ethics, other specifications, OCR, etc. Okay, so as I say, looking at Aristotelian Virtue Ethics. Now, the first thing to say about them is that rather than an act-centered theory such as utilitarianism, and if you've looked at the utilitarianism video, you'll know that judges what actions we take as to what is ethically, good or bad. Aristotelian virtue theory is agent-centered. Basically, it focuses on personal morality and what it is to be a good person. Okay, so for Aristotle, the central principle of his ethical theory is what it is to lead a good life for humans. So for Aristotle, he believes that a good life for human beings is all about human flourishing. In other words, making yourself a better person, or as he calls it, eudaimonia. Now, to sort of, determine what this might look like, imagine reading an obituary of a person in the newspaper, so someone who's just recently died. And in that article, the main focus is it says that they were very rich. Now, being very rich sounds pretty good, but is that all life is all about? Certainly Aristotle doesn't believe so. He doesn't think that, being very rich defines what a good life is. Surely there are other things that make a good life good. The fact that you have lead a fulfilling life, you've got a good education, etc. So that's what the theory looks at. Okay, now the reason behind this is that Aristotle believed that everything has a telos or purpose, so we get teleological from that. Not only that, but everything has a function, ergon, and properties or virtues, aret. According to Aristotle, the function of human beings is basically to use reason. Now, this sounds quite complicated. It's a little easier than you might think. So imagine, I don't know, that you want to go out and you want to buy a football. So the football has a purpose. It basically enables you to play football. But it almost certainly has to have properties that enable it to perform that function. So you might want a football to be round rather than square. You might want it to be light rather than heavy, but not so light that it'll just blow away. So you can see that how Aristotle comes to this idea that things have a purpose and that everything has to have a function and also properties that enable it to fulfill that purpose. Okay, so when it comes to human beings rather than footballs, Aristotle believes that a good life is one led by reason, and that in turn leads to eudaimonia or human flourishing. So Aristotle believes that in order to achieve this eudaimonia, humans need to act virtuously, guided by reason. Therefore, a good life is one in which a person has been guided by good reason. Now that sounds pretty easy, but we'll see that there are some things you need to consider when we look at that. Okay, so the first thing to say is that it seems obvious that humans possess reason, but it doesn't mean to say that they automatically choose to do the right thing. Aristotle believes that they do this by developing virtues. For example, being honest. However, being honest doesn't actually come naturally to people, it takes practice. And this kind of practice is called phronesis, or practical wisdom. It's basically knowing what the right thing to do in a given situation. Now, Aristotle believes that you need to practice this on a continual basis until it becomes part of your kind of human nature as such. However, he doesn't believe that it's human nature right from the beginning or outset of your lives. So, for example, you might be at a party and you've heard that your best friend has split up with their boyfriend or girlfriend, and that boyfriend or girlfriend approaches you and says that they, like you very much. Now, what the right thing to do depends on your sort of personal morality. Your personal morality may well be that, I don't know, you go off with that person. Your personal morality may dictate that you don't. But obviously, the right thing to do, given that they're the ex-boyfriend or girlfriend of your best friend, may well be to ignore them. That takes practice, it takes self-discipline and control, and that's what Aristotle believes by sort of practicing virtues or practical wisdom. Okay, so one of the things that you're probably familiar with through having your lessons is something called the golden mean. And according to Aristotle, virtue is found between extremes of behaviour, or as he calls it, the golden mean. It's a kind of average value. So how does this work practically? Well, for example, if you see an armed robbery taking place, you could choose to run away. That would be an example of cowardice. On the other end of the scale, you could decide to tackle the robbers, but bearing in mind they're armed robbers, that would be fairly reckless. So the right thing to do would be to choose the middle path, which would be to phone the police. That would be an example of courage in that particular situation. So you can see how that might work, and there are other examples. So you can have a look at this. Things like generosity sits in the middle of extravagance or sort of stinginess or miserliness. I can't say that word. But anyway, you can get the example. One of the criticisms of the examples that Aristotle provides is that they're very sort of ancient Greek warrior male centered. And so, one of the things we might think about is how these virtues have changed over time, and that they, come in and out of fashion. Okay, another thing that Aristotle believes is that our voluntary actions are the only ones that should be judged. And you can imagine, whereas a situation as humans, you might not act virtuously given the situation you find yourselves in, or that you might not act virtuously as a result of doing something by accident. So, for example, I don't know, you might drop something on your foot which is pretty heavy and shout out loud and swear. Now, that's not necessarily virtuous behaviour, but it is a result of your sort of accidental behaviour, so it wouldn't count or wouldn't be judged by Aristotle as virtuous behaviour. Similarly, and the example I think that Aristotle uses is that a ship in a storm may require people to throw goods overboard in order to make the ship lighter, to make it more buoyant and to float. Now, you wouldn't think that that's a virtuous action, but you've had to do it as a result of an involuntary event, a storm. Okay, so that basically sums up Aristotelian virtue ethics. There are, however, some problems. The first problem is that there's no guidance about what virtue we should choose and when. Aristotle seems to think that that's something we will arrive at, but it's not clear, even if we had arrived at that situation, whether we are doing the right thing. How would you know without any sort of strict instructions or guidance? The second thing is that Aristotle basically claims that virtuous people act virtuously. However, that's a circular argument. What does it exactly mean? How do we know that we have met a virtuous person and that they are acting virtuously? The last problem is that competing virtues may clash. So, for example, it may be a virtue to be reliable and turn up to someone's birthday party, but at the same time, it may be a virtue to be helpful. And you encounter someone whose car has broken down on the way to the party you're supposed to be attending. Well, what do? Do you ignore the person who's broken down even though they need your help, because the virtue of being reliable and turning up to the party supersedes that of being helpful? I don't know. So you can think about how competing virtues may clash. Okay, so as ever, I hope that this has been useful. And as always, it should be remembered that this is a revision video. It's not meant to be a comprehensive video or overview of Aristotelian virtue ethics, but I do hope that it has helped in some way. Thank you.